Welcome back to Auth Explained. It's episode 3. Today we're tackling OpenID Connect, the protocol that actually powers every login with Google button you've ever clicked. Think of it as the identity layer that sits on top of OAuth 2.0, answering a question OAuth alone was never designed to answer. Who exactly is this user signing in? So let's start with the problem. OAuth 2.0 is fantastic at handing your app a token that says, yes, you can access this data. But that token stays silent on who the user actually is. There's no standard field for a name, no guaranteed email, and historically, every provider cooked up their own way to surface that info. So the real question becomes, how does an app reliably learn who just logged in one consistent way that works everywhere? That's the gap OpenID Connect was built to fill. And here's the one-sentence definition worth holding on to. OpenID Connect is a thin identity layer that sits right on top of OAuth 2.0, giving your app a standard, verifiable answer to who is this user. In practice, that means 3 things. It adds an ID token to the OAuth exchange. It defines standard claims like name, email, and sub. And crucially, the same flow works with any compliant provider. So let's actually look at those layers side by side. At the bottom, you've got OAuth 2.0 doing what it's always done, handing out access tokens, managing scopes, running the flow that lets one app talk to another on your behalf. On top of that, OpenID Connect adds the identity layer, the ID token, the user info endpoint, and a standard set of claims. And the beautiful part? It's the same flow you already know. You just add one extra scope, OpenID. And suddenly authorization also gives you authentication. Here's the analogy that makes this click. Think of an access token like a ticket to a concert. It gets you through the door, but it says nothing about who's holding it. An ID token is more like a passport. It's issued by a trusted authority. It actually proves who you are, and anyone can verify it. So OAuth hands you the ticket, OpenID Connect hands you the passport, and the app, like a border officer, checks that passport before letting you in as you. So let's actually crack open that passport and see what's inside. An ID token is just a JWT, a signed JSON payload, and these claims are where the magic lives. You get IS, who issued it, sub, a stable unique ID for the user, AUD telling you which app it's meant for, plus things like email and name. And because the provider signs it, your app can verify it's legit without ever calling back to Google. Now, here's where a lot of developers get tripped up. The ID token is not the same thing as the access token. The ID token tells your app who the user is. It's meant to be read, verified, and trusted by your application. The access token, on the other hand, grants access to an API. It's opaque. You don't crack it open, you just forward it. One proves identity, the other unlocks resources. With that distinction in mind, let's actually walk through the login flow. And you'll notice it looks almost identical to plain OAuth. Your app redirects the user to the provider, but this time with the OpenID scope tacked on. They log in, consent, and the provider sends back a code. Your app swaps that code for tokens, and now, alongside the access token, you also get an ID token. Verify it, and you finally know who just signed in. That's really the only new piece on top of OAuth. Now about that verification step. It's not optional, and it's not just a formality. There are 4 things your app needs to check. First, the signature. The token has to be signed by the provider's published key, proving it wasn't forged. Then, the issuer claim, to confirm it actually came from the provider you trust. The audience claim, to make sure this token was minted for your app and not some other client. And finally, the expiry, because a valid token from last week is still a security problem today. Skip any of these and you're trusting a string, not an identity. Once you trust the token, the next question is, what's actually in it? That's where scopes come in. Scopes are how your app tells the provider which claims it wants about the user. The OpenID scope is mandatory. That's what flips plain OAuth into OpenID Connect, and it guarantees you get a sub, the user's stable identifier. Add profile for things like name and picture, email for the address and its verified flag, or address and phone if you need them. And if you realize later you need more, you don't have to redo the whole flow. Just call the user info endpoint with the access token. Now you might be thinking, that's a lot of URLs and keys to configure. Here's the beautiful part. You don't have to. Every OIDC provider publishes a standard discovery document at a well-known path, and a single curl to that URL hands you everything. The authorized endpoint, the token endpoint, the JWT URI for signing keys, even the list of supported scopes. Point your library at the provider, and it wires itself up automatically. And once that wiring is in place, you get something users have come to expect: single sign-on. The idea is simple. Sign in once at your identity provider, and every connected app, whether it's email, your Docs platform, or team chat, just trusts that session. No separate passwords, no repeated logins. And under the hood today, OIDC is what makes the vast majority of that magic actually work. Now, before we go further, let's clear up a few myths that trip people up. First, OIDC doesn't replace OAuth. It's built right on top of it, reusing the same flows and tokens, just adding identity. Second, please don't try to read user info from an access token. That's the ID token's job. The access token is for calling APIs. And third, OIDC and SML both do single sign-on, but OIDC is the modern JSON and REST flavor, while SML is the older XML-heavy world. With those myths cleared up, let's talk about how to actually get OIDC right in practice. The golden rule: always verify the ID token's signature and check that the issuer, audience, and expiry claims match what you expect. Lean on discovery and a vetted library rather than hand-rolling crypto, and stick with the authorization code flow plus PKCE. On the flip side, never trust an unverified token, never pull identity from an access token, and don't skip the nonce check. That's what hardens a real OIDC integration. Now that you know how to do OIDC right, let's look at who you'll actually be doing it with. On the consumer and enterprise side, Google and Microsoft cover most of your social and workplace logins, while OIDC and Okta give you managed identity as a service. If you'd rather self-host, Keycloak is the go-to open-source identity server, and Dex is a lightweight option popular in Kubernetes land. For the browser, OIDC Client TIC handles the flow for you. And when something looks off, JWT is your best friend for cracking open an ID token and inspecting the claims inside. So let's pull it all together. OpenID Connect is an identity layer sitting on top of OAuth 2.0, and what it really adds is the ID token, that signed JWT describing who the user is. Remember the distinction we kept coming back to. The ID token tells you who someone is, while the access token tells you what they're allowed to do. Always verify the signature, the issuer, the audience, and the expiry. And that, in a nutshell, is what's happening every time you click Login with Google or sign into your company's SSO. So when should you actually reach for OIDC? It's a great fit anytime you're letting users log in with Google or Microsoft, building single sign-on across multiple apps, or you genuinely need a verifiable user identity in a modern web, mobile, or single-page app. But it's probably overkill if you only need API access. Plain OAuth will do. Or if you're building a tiny internal tool, have no identity provider to lean on, or you're doing pure machine-to-machine work where there's no human in the loop at all. If you want to keep going from here, the Auth Explained series has companion episodes on JWTs, OAuth 2.0, sessions and cookies, API gateways, all the pieces that sit next to OpenID Connect in a real stack. And since identity is essentially the keys to everything, it's worth hardening the servers behind it too. That's exactly what the SSH Hardening Mastery course over at Dargslan.com courses is built for. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, when you're signing into apps day to day, do you reach for social login, or do you still prefer creating your own email and password account? And here's the small twist worth sitting with. Every time you hit login with Google, that's OpenID Connect doing the work, not plain OAuth. Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely read them. And that wraps up our little trilogy. JWTs gave us the tokens, OAuth gave us delegated access, and OpenID Connect finally gave us identity. If this clicked for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Auth Explained, and swing by dargslan.com for the written companions. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.